on the cross next to him. And he said, "This day you shall be with me in paradise." Okay? Well, first of all, I want to go back. I want to set it up. I want to know what's going on. How did we get to this place that Christ is there? And so what I did is I just started reading. You know, the passage was taken out of Luke, which is one of the synoptic gospels. Synoptic means all alike. I mean, we are not a synoptic church here. I mean, you're different from you and from you, and we're all different, but yet at the same time we are synoptic in that we all have the same story that we can tell. How Christ has come to us, and we are lifted up with the promise of paradise.
Yes.
Okay? So, when I start looking, the first place I go is to Mark. And the reason why I go to Mark is they feel that Mark was probably the first book, the first gospel that was written. Okay? Now, if you know anything about Mark, you know that he was a young man. He'd had a terrible experience with Paul on the first missionary journey. Basically quit, went home, and Paul, for whatever reason, really hadn't forgiven him for that.
Yes.
He just didn't want to try him out again, so he didn't take him on his second and third missionary. So, I don't know what consumed him, except for the Holy Spirit, to write the first gospel. In other words, he wanted to tell the story. He was a young man. He was in a hurry. He wanted to tell the story in a hurry. He wanted to get it out there for everybody to read so they could see it all and they could experience it all. And so it's a very fast and short, just goes real quick. Yeah. Look at the first, let me take you back to the first paragraph. The first chapter here. You'll see what I mean. Okay? We don't talk about the birth of Christ. Where do we start with? We start with John the Baptist prepares the way. I would have thought it had been important to know where Jesus came from and how he got down here and who he was the son of and all that kind of stuff before we got to John the Baptist. Maybe this is why the Baptists really grab hold of Mark and really enjoy this. But when you get to the end, though, he tells the story. They had already, I'm going to start off each of these where basically he has been sentenced. Christ has been sentenced. Okay? And I'll even start there. It says in verse 15, it starts out, very early in the morning, the chief priests and the elders and the teachers of the law and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "You have said so," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things are accusing you? How many people are accusing you?" But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was just amazed. Now it's the custom of the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison for insurrections, who had committed murder in an uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" Knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priest had handed Jesus over to him, but the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas. And Pilate tried to stop him. And he kept hearing, "Crucify him, crucify him." And finally, he had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. Well, from there, the soldiers mocked Jesus. They led Jesus away to the place they called the gladiatorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers, and they put a purple robe on him, and they twisted together the crown of thorns and set it on him, and they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with the staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him, and when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothing on him, and they led him out to be crucified. And the first person they started to mention on the route was Simone. Yes. A certain man of Cyrene, Simone, was passing by on his way from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. They crucified him, dividing up his clothing. They cast lots to see what each one would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on each side, one on the right, one on the left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their head and saying, "So, you are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him. Among them saved themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." And those crucified with him were also heaping insults on him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema whatever, sabachthani." I used to know how to say this. My tongue doesn't work much anymore. What it means is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When those were handing, and they thought that Elijah was saying this. And at that time, Mark records that somebody ran up to him. They filled a sponge with wine vinegar and put it on a shaft and offered it to him to drink. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain at the temple was torn from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. Many other women who had come with him to Jerusalem were also there. That's in essence a very quick story. I mean, we make 4-hour movies on this story. You know? But that's what they said. You know, but this is what hit the streets first. They think that Matthew was next. Now, Matthew obviously had a copy of Mark's writings, or had listened to him. And he used many of the same stories in his, and this is why they call the synoptics. They have many things in common. Okay? And if I were to read you the same story, it would be almost word for word. Almost word for word here. we were talking, we're looking at the 7 last statements. That my God, why have you forsaken me? Is on Matthew 2. And those 2 Gospels carried the same Satan. They didn't mention any of the other 6. But they did mention that there was another one when he died. Okay? They didn't state what it was. Okay? So now we get to go over to Luke. Now here's the interesting thing. You would think that the Gospels would have been written by who? The disciples, right? Was Mark a disciple? I mean, one of the original 12? No, not at all. Now we have Luke coming along, and he's Dr. Luke, okay? He's a little more educated. I mean, he speaks Greek well. He writes it well. He has a good thought process. He does research and a lot of it. If you look at here, he is detailed. I mean, when you talk about the birth of Christ at Christmas, you almost always read Luke's description of that. I mean, Mark didn't even have anything about it. And then Matthew starts off with all the begats. Because what was Matthew trying to do? He was trying to present everything from the Jewish point of view. He was trying to show that Jesus came and that he was there in order to show that his book was going to show you that all prophecy was fulfilled by Jesus. And that was his goal. Okay? So now we have Luke come along, and he wants to give a very thorough case for who Jesus was. He gives many of the same stories, the miracles and things that Matthew and Mark did, but it's like he really starts digging. I mean, he starts digging into every story he could do. I imagine he went and spent hours with Mary just talking to her. And he also had John that he probably talked to. And he had Paul for sure. They think that Luke and Paul were very close. And there at the end, Luke was with Paul. And he thought of him as being just so close to him. So Luke starts out and he does everything in detail. I mean, when we start talking about the birth of Christ, he doesn't start with Mary getting pregnant. He doesn't talk about the angel first coming to Mary and then to Joseph. No. Who did Matthew say the angel came to? Joseph. Why? It was a man's point of view. He was a man. I mean, he was doing, this was the traditional Jewish standpoint. Well, when you get to Luke, he's not so much that way. He even brings the women out a little more, and everything was done. And so he is taking a story that didn't, sure, he had Mary, but he started with something before. He started with John the Baptist. You know, he started with Elizabeth and you know, that whole story there where John was going to be, she was barren and they were trying to have a kid, and he told the papa there in the Holy of Holies that he was praying, and he said, your wife is going to have a kid, and he said, oh, she can't have a kid, she's just old and worn out and almost dead. I mean, just worn out. And all of a sudden he got struck dumb. Until the child was born. And then they came to name him. He said his name was going to be John. Because what? The angel said it was going to be named John. So he said it's going to be named John. And the people around him said, what are you talking about, John? You don't even have a John in your whole cotton-picking family. What's going on here? And then all of a sudden he got his voice and it said his name's going to be John. Yeah. You know? I mean, that's a lot of detail compared to what Mark just did. And that's the whole way on what he did. And so we wouldn't expect anything less than what Luke got started back here. Okay? Let's go to Luke. If we start in 23, we kind of hear the same story, but with a little different tinge. Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, "You brought me this one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no bias for your charges against him. Neither has Herod. For I sent him to Herod, and Herod sent him back to me." You know? And as you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him. I mean, he's going to placate him and punish him. Even though he's innocent, he's going to punish him. I mean, the Romans didn't have any problem with putting the whip to anybody. Okay? And the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us!" Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he spoke to them, "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for death penalty. Therefore I have him punished and then released to him." But with the loud shouts they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked, and surrendered Jesus to their will. Now we all know, I'm sure you all know by now, that the Jews couldn't go out and kill people. They didn't have the right. I mean, they could whip them, they could do things, but they couldn't put on but so many lashes onto them and things of that nature. And they wanted more, though. And that's why they had to go to Pilate to get permission in order to crucify. I mean, that was the goal. The whole goal for this thing, from the time they went to arrest him, was to crucify him. And all they did was have a kangaroo court and throw up some false witnesses against him and say, "Guilty! Yeah. Crucify him!" And away he went. And again, as the soldiers led him away, they see Simone. Good name, Simone. You're a very helpful person here in this thing. Yes, sir. He was on his way to the country. A large number followed him, including the women, who mourned and wailed for him. You notice that Luke really tells about the women and what's going on here. And Jesus turned to them and said this, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that have never bore, and the breasts that have never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if the people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" What he's talking about is not many years after his death, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. And there will be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth for sure. And when he talks about the tree is green, they're talking about him being alive. And now that what's going to happen when he's dried up and he's gone. And then they say 2 other men, both criminals, were led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. And Jesus said to them, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And then right after that, they just said casually, and they divided up his clothes and cast lots. I mean, you would have thought that what you spoke about last time, Ken, those words would have been just highlighted there. Big, bold, like page full of highlights there, just sticking out of us. Forgive them. They not know what they're doing. And the people stood watching. The rulers even sneered at him. They said, "Save the others. Let him save himself. He's God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar, and he said, "If you're the King of Jews, save yourself." You do know why he didn't take the wine vinegar, right? He did not want to dull the pain that was going to be coming. There is a written notice that was above him which, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." And the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said. "Since you were under the same sentence, we are punished justly, and we're getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Now wait a minute. That's not what the previous two Gospels said. The previous two Gospels just said there were two criminals that were hung with him, and they also mocked him along with the soldiers and everybody else. But all of a sudden here, now we have one of the thieves saying, "Why do you mock him?" You know, some people take great exception to that. Great exception. Let me ask you, have you never said something as you were in pain, or as if you were being humiliated, said something to somebody, and then all of a sudden decided, you know, that was foolish?
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's exactly what happened to this one. He watched Christ there. He studied him. He heard the women crying out for him behind all the people that were insulting. He said, "I've heard of Jesus. I know about Jesus. He doesn't deserve to be here." And he shut the other thief down. He said, "Have you no shame? You deserve it and I deserve it, but not him." At that time, Christ said, "Truly I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise."